All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the second day of Identiverse. I am George Roberts. I'm the principal identity architect for McDonald's. It's actually a new role. I used to be a director and lead the team, but I'm moving more into a technical role. So some of you have been to my session last year, and where I talked a lot about kind of how we do identity at McDonald's. The session this year is going to be a little different. I will tie it into some ideas around McDonald's, but we're not going to really talk too much specifically about McDonald's. Always open to having conversations with people, so if you want to talk about that, hit me up afterwards. But this session actually stemmed from a brief conversation I had and an idea that I had at the Identiverse local event in Chicago last year. And we were talking about the Barbie movie, of all things, and I was talking about how my daughter is obsessed, or at the time was obsessed with the I'm Just Ken song, and was singing it around the house every day, all day. And it made me kind of chuckle, and I kind of had this brief thought, and I said, yeah, it's kind of like, talking about, it made me think about a decentralized identity because, hey, I'm just George, right? It's just me. I should be able to tell you who I am. And that kind of spawned this idea for this proposal. And so that's where the title, I'm Just George Living in a Decentralized Identity World, came from. But I will say, I am not a decentralized identity expert. Just to level set this talk, this is really sort of the culmination of my explorations of the ideas of decentralized identity. Bringing McDonald's back into it a little bit, we have a very distributed organization. We are in 105 different markets around the world, many of which are licensed markets. So the people who work in those markets don't actually work for McDonald's, they work for our licensee. And even in the markets that we do run, most of our restaurants are franchised. So the people that work in those franchises, in those restaurants, don't actually work for us. And in fact, 93% of all of our users in our 2.2 million user enterprise identity system don't actually work for us. So they don't live in any of our HR systems. So figuring out how to provision, authenticate, and secure all of those identities is a challenge. And we kind of have to bend over backwards in many cases, and we don't always get the results that we're looking for. And so the idea of decentralized identity really is appealing. And so I've been keeping my eye on it from a technology perspective. And recently, the thing that kind of piqued my interest a lot was the Bluesky system. Anybody here use Bluesky? Social media, sort of Twitter alternative, or X, if you will. And its identity mechanism is an implementation of decentralized identity. So that made me start to think hey, a couple of years ago when I was looking at decentralized identity, the tech looked pretty cool. The ideas behind it were good, but how could I apply this in an enterprise setting and in a business setting? And it just wasn't there just from a, ubiquity standpoint. But it made me think when we started to see things like Bluesky using decentralized identity, all right, it's starting to get out there a little bit more. So I wanted to take a look and see sort of where are we at today with decentralized identity. So for those of you who don't really know, I'm going to do a little bit of an overview of what decentralized identity is. But basically, it's a system that allows users to control their personal information and to be able to selectively present that information to people who need to verify it at the time that they need to verify it. And it allows those verifiers to be able to trust that the data that they're getting is accurate. Now, I will warn you, the slides are a little text heavy. Part of that is because I am going to make these slides as well as supplementary links available. I'll post it on my LinkedIn afterwards. and I wanted to make sure that it wasn't just a deck filled with a bunch of bullet points. So, look for that in the next few days. Now, much of the tech underlying decentralized identity lives on top of distributed storage systems like blockchain or distributed ledgers. Now, we have these things called verifiable credentials. And what those are is basically a document that is issued by an issuer. It could be a government, it could be a business, it could be an educational institution that says something about the holder of that piece of information. Now, the holder is the user, okay? And the verifier is somebody who needs to take that piece of information that's being presented to them by the holder and verify that it is accurate, that it came from the issuer, that it is for the holder. And so you see the triangle here. It's basically these are the three pieces that allows decentralized identity and verifiable credentials to work. Now, one of the things that is interesting to me is why are people looking at verifiable credentials and why are they looking at decentralized identities? We're seeing a lot of deepfakes in hiring. I don't know if anybody here has been challenged with that, but we're seeing things like, people who are applying for jobs and they're really there for corporate espionage. They're coming in from North Korea applying for jobs. We have people who are applying for jobs and who are doing 2 and 3 jobs and basically just not showing up for a couple of them. We have executive impersonation and financial fraud. So this is internal to a business. We've seen scenarios where someone has used a video deepfake of a CEO or other executive and then used that to get someone within their organization with the ability to issue money, to do payments, to then go and send a transaction and send corporate money off to an attacker. Phishing and social engineering attacks. We see this in people who are doing a phishing and they make it seem like it's somebody that the person works with and gets them to give up credentials for systems, gets them to install malware on their PCs, etc. Another big one is disinformation and reputational damage. If you have your CEO have a deep fake posted online of them saying something, really egregious or, something that is going to be harmful to your brand, there needs to be a way for us to verify that these things are coming from the actual CEO. And then, of course, things like bypassing biometric security systems, being able to use deepfakes to trick, less complex biometric systems. So, some of the benefits of decentralized identity are immutable verification. So the thing with decentralized identity is that when records are created, when verifiable credentials are created, they are tamper-proof. Okay? They're signed with a key from both the issuer of the credential, and then when they are presented, they're also signed by the holder in real time. So they can't be tampered in transit, they can't be faked, because there's always a way for the verifier to go back and verify that the signatures match. Another great thing about decentralized identities is it eliminates central points of failure. The idea behind decentralized identifiers is that they're distributed throughout a blockchain or a distributed ledger, and you're not reliant on one back-end database system that could potentially go down. You're allowing for a more robust method of being able to utilize these systems. A big one, and this comes into the whole privacy aspect, is selective disclosure. the idea is if I, as an employee, need to share some information with my employer and they want to use a credential to verify that, that credential may have multiple pieces of information in it. You know, it may be my driver's license. Well, does my employer need to know all of my driver information? Do they need to know when my driver's license expires? Do they need to know what my driver's license number is? Now, maybe they only need to know that I have a valid driver's license, that it is currently valid, and that it is valid, you know, for the purposes of whatever it is that I need for my job. So it allows me to share the appropriate information for the verification scenario without having to release more information than's necessary. We talked about the CEO with the deepfake. There is the ability for us to do credentialed authenticity for content creators. So it would allow us to do things like when we post a video, you know, be able to authenticate that it came from the source that it claimed from, because it could be signed by the person that created it. And then automated fact-checking and authentication. So for instance, if you have to do some kind of a customer verification, that can all be built automatically, because if everything is following the standards for decentralized identifiers and verified credentials, then you can have these automated systems that will go out and will verify all of the different pieces of information automatically without having to, you know, jump through a bunch of hoops to do integrations with a bunch of different systems. So, a few of the ways that enterprises can benefit from decentralized identifiers. Okay. So, employee credentials. So, when somebody gets hired, we talked about that we can go out and use, in the hiring process, we can verify previous employment credentials. We can do degrees, certificates, background checks, etc. Training and compliance internally within the company, you could use verified credentials as the mechanism for identifying when employees have taken certain types of training, and you can use those verified credentials to then use for access to other systems, or to for knowledge checks to understand who might have the abilities or the knowledge to address certain situations. Digital onboarding, this one's more of a customer or client facing, but in many regulated industries like financial systems, they can use verified credentials for to meet the Know Your Customer guidelines and regulations. So this is when you go in to open up a bank account, you've got to go present a whole bunch of documentation around who you are, because they're required by law to be able to keep track of who is opening accounts. And using verified credentials and digital identities, they can streamline this process and make it a lot easier for them to onboard new customers. A couple of other things: partner and supplier trust. Kind of back to that whole selective sharing of information. If you have a partner or a supplier who needs to present you with documentation to show that they are certified in certain things, or to show that they've had their audits done, etc., they can present you with verified credentials that would satisfy those needs to show that they have the certifications or the audits in place, without having to necessarily present you with a full document that has a whole bunch of information that maybe you don't need to know as a partner. And then also for cross-company credentials, again, one of the things in our scenario with McDonald's is that we have a huge supplier and a huge partner ecosystem. And so being able to share information back and forth between all of those partners and the companies that we work with in a standardized, verifiable way is really appealing to us. So, let's talk about some of the missing pieces as I see them. Those of you who attended my talk last year and have attended other talks that I've given in the past couple of years probably remember that I talked about how we have a huge number of crew accounts. It's 1.6 million crew people who we issue identities to. And one of the big struggles that we have is how do we secure those accounts? Right? We can't mandate that they use their personal device for MFA. We can certainly make that available. We can make TOTP and other device-based MFA systems available, but we can't mandate it. Well, it's kind of the same thing with distributed identity and verifiable credentials. It's all digital, right? I mean, for the most part, in the sense of using it from an identity perspective, you have to have some kind of a device. So one of the things is, there are some opportunities for alternatives here. I've listed them out in terms of, other things that can be used as an alternative to sort of the traditional distributed identity and verifiable credentials. And in some cases, they make a lot of sense. Things like SMS and based type identity solutions, very similar to SMS MFA. Is it as secure? No, but it may be appropriate for certain scenarios. Physical identity cards, again, doesn't really work for us, mainly because of the cost and the logistics of distributing them out to people. But for some scenarios, that may make sense where you might be able to just have for a frontline worker that is working in a retail environment or in a factory, you may be able to distribute physical identity cards, or you may be able to use shared or public kiosks or shared devices to use these verifiable credentials. But as a whole, when I started looking at this, one of the first things I said was, hey, we as an enterprise can't really drive this, right? I can't go to my users and say, hey guys, you guys have to figure out how to get a digital identity wallet on your personal device and figure out all this technology and how to present, how to obtain a distributed identity and present verifiable credentials. We're just not quite there yet, but there is, as a society and as things are changing within the world, there's sort of hope, right? Because the idea is that the more that we can get these frameworks and standards in place, and the more the government and other sort of larger institutions make these available and make these commonplace, it opens up the scenario where more and more people are used to using them for things like their driver's license and for being able to obtain government services. And once they have gotten over that hurdle of how do I get an identity wallet, how do I get my mobile driver's license, how do I get my government issued ID, then it becomes easier to start to apply those solutions in an enterprise environment because more and more people are going to be used to that way of operating. So these are a few of the standards that are currently available. W3C Verifiable Credentials 2.0 actually just came out last month. So I managed to sneak it in here at the last minute. It does look like it's got some really nice updates on the previous iterations, taking into account how do we align and interoperate with many of the other standards. This is one of the challenges, of course, with standards in any industry. There's different things that different organizations are trying to achieve, right? So the ISO standard for mobile driving licenses is really very focused on mobile driving licenses and the scenarios that enables, and doesn't really expand upon that in terms of other other ways that those could be used. Whereas the verifiable credentials standards are really much more broad, but they're about being able to present verifiable credentials in a digital setting. And so it's really incumbent upon all of these standards bodies and us as the industry to insist that the standard bodies take into account interoperability. And I think they're doing a pretty good job because, for instance, the verifiable credentials standard, they have made sure that they can support some of these other standards by doing transforms on the data in those credentials and then being able to use them. So you could take like an MDL credential that is an ISO standard, and you could have it transformed into a format that can be then used in a digital scenario with a W3C verifiable credential standards. But still a lot in flux here and a lot going on, but it's nice to see that the various high-profile standards bodies really are working on this and are trying to do so in a way that moves the industry forward as a whole and not just be very siloed. So over the next few years, there's going to be a significant focus on a number of different things. But some of the big ones are collaboration between the regulatory bodies and developers, standardized verification frameworks, right, and the global adoption of digital wallets. So I mentioned it on the previous slide, but Europe has a digital wallet standard for the European Union where they are requiring that every country in the European Union adhere to this standard for digital wallets, and it also incorporates some of the same technologies and interoperability that the other standards do. So it seems to me, and at least in my read on this, everybody's doing a good job of working together on this. But I would expect that we will see more movement on this in terms of, capabilities and innovations that bridge the various different technical situations and the standards into a single trusted framework. Now, will it be like the nirvana of no? There's still, I'm sure there's still going to be challenges, but I think we're at that point now where we're starting to see like, hey, this can really have real world applications, and we're seeing entities and institutions and governments that are actually applying this. So my takeaway from this would be prepared. I mean, can we use this in an enterprise setting today? Maybe in certain circumstances for certain things, but hey, is decentralized identity going to come in and completely replace your current identity system and single sign-on and federation and all of the other wonderful things that we have today? I don't think so. Maybe for some really bleeding edge folks who might be able to take that leap. But I know we're not able to really apply it in an enterprise setting today, but it's getting there, right? And you don't want to be unaware of the capabilities and unaware of what's going on, and making sure that you're participating in the industry and keeping yourself up to date on what's going on. So the three sort of things that I think we need to look at and be prepared for transformations in are regulations. There's a lot of privacy regulations and a lot of data-related regulations that decentralized identity and verifiable credentials really help with. User expectations, right? As more and more users use these things in their daily lives in order to be able to obtain government services or present their driver's license, et cetera, they're going to start to expect it. I mean, if you think back on, 15 years ago before the iPad and iPhone came out, people in an enterprise setting were just kind of like, yeah, okay, that's how enterprise IT works. All of the software looks like crap and it works horribly and it takes forever. And now you've got people who have these devices in their pocket all day long who can get free and 99-cent apps that are beautiful and have wonderful user experiences. And now they demand that from an enterprise setting as well, because why should they have to put up with crappy software in an enterprise setting? So as the consumer and as the marketplace and the overall environment changes, the user expectations are going to change along with it. And then, of course, technical advances. So I'll leave you with a last quote here from The Lord of the Rings, Two Towers. And if you didn't notice, all of my slides had movie quotes that were, I tried to throw a little pop culture in there, but the world is changing. Can you feel it? So I'd love to connect with you, and talk about this more. Again, I don't claim to be a decentralized identity expert, but I would love to talk about anybody else who in an enterprise setting is using decentralized identity or exploring the use of decentralized identity. If you have any other questions about McDonald's or how we're doing things or what we're looking at, I'd be happy to talk about that as well. This is that's my LinkedIn QR code if you feel comfortable scanning that. Otherwise, there's the link. And I don't know that we have time for questions because I think we're at 25 minutes. So I'm happy to answer any questions if you want to come up and talk to me afterwards or grab me out in the hall. And thank you for coming.